let's talk about Jimmy Madio, because it seems to me that everybody has a good Madio story.
It's a popular topic. It's Dale Dye Madio stories all the way.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've heard about the now, I suppose, legendary Soho bar fight.
Yes.
Well, let me just set a few things straight here.
Please do.
And let me just elaborate on the events of the evening. We were at a very sort of reputable late night London establishment in the heart of Soho, and we were in one of the private rooms upstairs, and the night was going, we were fine, we were having a good time. It was quite near the beginning of the shoot, and we were all, it was one of our first big was there as well, and she was sitting on, sort of smoking out a window. You couldn't smoke indoors back then in that place anyway. And something is sort of said to her from the street by these guys, and I don't know what. And she turned around and told them to, to F off. And then I think it was Jimmy said, "What do they say to you?" And she said, "Oh, something like that." And he just went right, and he ran outside, and he was followed very closely by I think Neil and one of the Sergeant E, Sergeant Edgerton, who was one of the drill sergeants as well. And these guys, seeing little Jimmy Madio run out, and sort of in his very thick sort of Bronx accent, have a go at them, and then they just sort of went, "Oh yeah, whatever." And they sort of Neil walk out. Neil is a big guy, and sort of walk out behind him and stuff like that. And then sort of Jimmy just sort of waded into them, and they absolutely ran for their lives. I mean, it didn't actually ever become a fight, because they ran right away. And Jimmy just chased after them, and then he sort of disappeared around the corner, and I think that's the last we saw of him that night. He sort of. I think he was scared, or something that might sort of escalate even further, so he disappeared. And I think maybe he came back much later on.
Neil said he was looking for him everywhere, and he was like back at his room.
Yeah, he called him, and he's
like, "What are you doing, Neil? I've been here the whole time."
But he was. It never really turned into a proper fight. But it was. It was all sort of some sort of insult was hell. Actually, I think Jimmy might have sort of poured his beer out the window over their heads or something as well, something like that. But the other Jimmy story, I mean, as you guys probably know, I turned up, I arrived at the boot camp a day late, because I sort of doing that thing with my sort of head being done and stuff like that. And I remember when they sort of everyone walked into the boot camp, everyone was doing an assault course. And the first thing I see is Jimmy doing it by himself. And I couldn't believe this guy could move that fast and over all these obstacles but that quickly. I mean, Jimmy was one of the fittest people I've ever met in my life when we turned up to the boot camp. He was like a human dynamo. He was flying over this assault course, and the rest of us, when we tried to do it, literally we'd sort of get over about halfway, and half of us collapsed with exhaustion. And we'd all sort of done a bit of training. I keep in relatively good shape anyway, but a lot of the guys had sort of made sure they could put in extra training to make sure they could handle the boot camp. But Jimmy, man, he was I couldn't believe that guy. He just flew over this assault course. And the rest of us sort of halfway through it, just sort of gasping for breath and crawling through the sand and sort of getting stuck on the cargo net, and he just flew over it. It's amazing.
Yeah, he told us that it was a lot like running rooftops in Brooklyn. That it was just growing up. That's what he had to do, and it was just playing. He
called them trails. They had trails to escape from getting in trouble.
Right,
like jumping in and out of dumpsters and stuff, like fire escapes and rooftops.
Yeah, it was really kind of an interesting portrayal of. He's like, I was ready for it, man. I got over there and they wanted me to run that thing. I was like, bam! It's just like running trails at home.
He absolutely was. He was bang ready for it, man. He was the only guy that could. And also when we we had to do like 3 mile runs every morning before we had breakfast, and it was killing. And him and a couple of the other guys were just Neil as well. Neil was very fit. We'd just keep running. They'd be our pace setters. We'd just say, look, just let Neil and Jimmy run at the front, and we'd try and keep up with them. And he was amazing. He was absolutely amazing.
Now, did you happen to read Ambrose's book?
Yeah, I read Band of Brothers twice. And I studied it very close. And the main thing I did actually was study all the research I sent on Ed Tipple. I tried to be as true to him as he was. My focus was very much on portraying him accurately. But I read the book. Absolutely, I read the book twice, cover to cover.
And how much of Ed did you bring from his stories and his talking to you? How much of that did you bring to the silver screen, and how much of that's just your acting?
Well, I mean, I just tried to be the person. I asked him for a lot of stories about what happened that wasn't actually on screen, to try and just give the character, flesh the character out, and make sure that I knew the experiences he'd been through in the meantime. And obviously, I asked him very closely about what happened when he got hit in Karantan, and he got absolutely, he literally did. Yeah, he told me he really does. It really was like that. Like they were portrayed. He said he walked out of that thing. He couldn't hear anything clearly. He couldn't see anything clearly, and he didn't realize his legs were both broken and everything. And he was still walking on them because he was so shell shocked he couldn't even feel the pain of it. But I just tried to make sure that I had in the back of my mind when I was doing all my scenes that I had everything, all the information and everything. I knew everything that he'd been through up to that point that wasn't on screen, so I could just give it that little bit of accuracy and sort of emotional authenticity that it needed.